The Soviet split was a major event affecting everyone globally, and there was a state of unrest, and the world was scared that another world war might be around the corner. The repercussions of the Cold War was clearly visible. The economy was down, and the conditions seemed to be worsening by the day. A small village in the eastern Russia was feeling the misery of it all. The winter come, and the resources seemed to be in deficit. There was very less food. The roads to the city were cut off, and being closer to the border, they were scared by invasions and war. They had no way to defend themselves, and their biggest concern was that they might get forgotten in the waves of war. Now that the nuclear force was a big thing, and the nuclear war seemed to be close, everyone was quite scared and was preparing their bunkers and stocking their food. But not this village. They were too far and too underprepared. Along came to the war, and the borders were shut down. The war broke out in winter, and all they had was stocked up for winter, and the winter never ended there. The village people gathered around in the dusty broken shelter they made to protect themselves from air raids. The air raids stopped after days, and they saw that the reserve, where they were storing their food, was destroyed. The bridges and all the ways leading to the city were destroyed, and no one seemed to have contact with the outside world. 3 men who tried crossing the cold, frozen river died and drowned after going into shock while trying to cross the river. The villagers salvaged every bit of food they could, and together, in a sense of unity, they were able to collect enough to feed them for a week. The rations were controlled, and the weather was worsening, and hunger was diluting people and making them irrational. The people of the village were now getting frustrated, and the sense of unity seemed to have a meltdown. They were fighting each other and arguing over a single grain of rice. The old man of the village proposed a plan to some boys. He said, "I have maybe a few months left to live, or by far a year. Now, I might not be very big, but I have been healthy throughout my life. I want you to kill me and eat me. I cannot see the children dying from hunger right in front of my eyes." This proposal shocked the whole town, and they ignored it. But after a while, when no food, no help, and no hope was in sight, they went back to the old man and asked if his proposal was still on the table. The old man said no, and he just said that because he was drunk. The boys were angry, and one of them, in anger, stabbed the man. Now that the old man was dying, they decided to not tell anyone and cut him into pieces and cook the old man. They served the whole village, and people were too famished to notice anything. At this point, they were thankful to the boys. The boys said that they hunted the deer. And now the responsibility of food was upon the shoulders of those boys. So they started killing old people slowly. The villagers started noticing the disappearance. The boys were apprehended, and they told everything to the villagers. At first, the villagers were angry, and they almost killed the boys. But then they realized if it wasn't for these boys, the whole village would have died of hunger. The village decided that anyone over 75 from then on would be eligible to be eaten. The grandfather of the boys who started this was next. The boys skinned his grandfather, knowing that it was for the betterment of the whole community. Russian troops arrived 2 days later with food and resources. The Russian troops were never seen again. This was the story of the cannibal town of Eastern Russia. No one knows how much truth it holds, but no one dares to look into it. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. Rostov is a town in western Russia. It is located near the vast lake Nero. The town is beautiful, and the architecture of it is precise. but that is a beautiful image that has been made for the outsiders, for the tourists. What I remember Rostov from is one deadly incident that happened near the lake house among the wild coast of Lake Nero. I remember it clearly, by every little detail, because it was only me that came out alive from it. So the story began during the last year of our term in university. We were all excited for the new horizons that we were set to achieve as we set out into the real world. Me and my friends were all from Rostov, but we studied at a university in St. Petersburg. I was studying to become a journalist, and my friends were all enrolled in different programmers. We decided to spend the last vacation of our college term in my friend's lake house at Rostov. The lake house was gifted to his great-grandfather, for he was one of the conspirators who helped in the assassination of Rasputin. He was one of the 5 key conspirators in the murder of Rasputin. We decided to share the stories during the evening bonfire, sharing different stories of adventures and mystery, when my friend decided to tell the story of what happened after Rasputin was assassinated. He started telling it and went on without stopping. It was December 30th, 1916. My great-grandfather and 4 other generals shot Rasputin in the center of the head after they poisoned him and then threw him into the river. It took them a whole lot of work just to slice him a little. There was no pain that man felt and no way to kill him. He claimed himself to be a god, and everybody almost believed it. They said no poison could kill him, and it seemed true when he ate all of the poison they served him and it did nothing. They actually shot the guy in between his eyes and still, he walked and charged them. At first they thought that he was not human, and the 5 horsemen they called themselves. They were the one who decided to kill Rasputin for the better future of Soviet, because Rasputin was pure evil, and all he did was believe in the evilest things possible. The 5 horsemen were helped by British intelligence to carry out the assassination. It took them over 3 days to really kill Rasputin, but what happened was even scarier. After they declared Rasputin dead, they thought it was all gone for good, but that was just the start. A month after my great-grandfather was gifted this lake house, they decided to have a little celebration over here, and all the 5 men gathered around to have a celebration. They were all drunk and joyous. They heard a loud noise coming from the outside. At first, they thought it was just a bear, so they ignored it. One of the men decided to go out for a bathroom break. Now it was an hour since the first man went on outside, so all of them decided to check him out. They were afraid that he would pass out outside and a bear would probably maul him. But when they go outside, what they saw put them in shock. It was Rasputin, alive, with the bullet hole still visible on his skull. At first, they did not believe and thought maybe the vodka is too strong. But then Rasputin bit one of the men's neck and started eating him alive, and that is when they were back to their combat mode and started an attack on Rasputin. He was even stronger than before. For almost 4 hours, they went on to combat Rasputin. It was impossible to kill him, so somehow they managed to chain him down. And it is said that still to this day in the basement, Rasputin lives, underfed and never visited. I have the key to the basement if one would like to see. We all laughed at the story, but then my friend showed us the key, and it was a secret door behind the fireplace that went 20 meters down into a basement, and it was a highly secret chamber with the weapons and swords of the 5 horsemen still there. And as went there as a glass chamber, and as we thought it was empty, we started laughing. And one of my friends, Vladimir, decided to enter the chamber, and he opened it. And from the roof, an aged, decomposed body dropped onto my friend Vladimir, and it strangled him as the doors of the chamber were shut, and long tongue of that dark figure went through the throat of my friend. The decomposed body died, and my friend, who seemed to be dead, rose up and checked himself out. And he said, "This is a beautiful body for Rasputin. Tell me, what was his name?" He looked at us in anger and asked us again, "Kakis Vali, tell me what was his name?" And I said in my trembling voice, "Vladimir Vladimirovich." And then he spread his arms and said, "Not anymore. Now I am Vladimir Putin." And as he walked out, he took one of the swords of the 5 horsemen and said, "Now it looks like it is my turn to rule the world." He went on stabbing every single one of my friends and came closer and said, "What is your name?" And I said, Igor Sechin." And that is how it all began. My friendship with Vladimir Putin, and how we ended up ruling the world and bringing it down to decadence and death.
But last autumn, my dad gave me something that he'd been keeping hold of that would spark off something of an interest in the First World War. It was the 11th of November, Armistice Day, when my dad walked into my room and handed me a small leather-bound book that looked like it was 100 years old. But I suppose that's because it was, in fact, even older than that. He told me to be very, very delicate with it because it was a family heirloom and incredibly precious. The kind of thing that could easily find its way into a museum one day, but instead, we kept it as a close reminder of how our family had a close connection to one of the most horrific events in world history. Before that, history was something of an abstract concept, something that dead old man did that had little bearing on my own life. But in that moment, I realized it was just as flesh and blood as I was, since my family had a deep connection with it, that it was just as much a part of me as it was for them. My dad explained that the little book was a diary kept by my great-great-granddad, who had fought with Northumberland Fusier in the Battle of the Pressing during the First World War. And since it was Armistice Day, that it was a perfect time to get me to get acquainted with that. But as I said, it wasn't just an account of his experiences in World War I. It was a record of how he had been present at one of the darkest episodes in the history of humanity. It was the 22nd of April, 1915. Just after dawn this morning, the Germans opened up with a very heavy torrent. It was a lot of rifle bullets at first, pinging over our heads as he got down in the trenches. But then, we heard the machine gun fire, kicking off this clacker, clacker, clacker. The bullets whizzing over our heads. We didn't know what they were trying to hit. All that fire seemed like a waste of bullets, and despite all the racket, we actually laughed at how we seemed to have been sent to face a division of blind Germans. But as it turned out, they were all part of their horrible plan to get us as low down in the trenches as they could, to be fodder for what came next. Once the fire had pettered out, I took a little look over the trench to make sure that there were no German stormtroopers rushing our trenches to toss bombs inside. But just before I did, I heard the strangest noise coming from no man's land, like a kind of sizzling you might expect to hear from a pan of frying bacon or the like. Then, when I finally looked, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was like a yellowy green wall of mist approaching our position, thick and heavy, almost clinging to the ground, had rolled across. And it was ginormous, at least 20 feet up in the air. I really do mean it was like a great wall approaching us. There was absolutely no escaping it. We had no earthly idea what it was that was approaching us, but it put the fear of God into us regardless. And it began to roll over us. That's when men started to choke. I started coughing and sputtering, this thick, mucousy saliva cascading from our lips, my eyes burning, and my nostrils did to any bit of exposed fleshy skin the stuff touched turned to burn horribly. I didn't quite see it at the time, but some men tried to escape the cloud of death by lying down in the trenches, which was definitely not the right thing to do, as it was heavier than air and concentrated near the ground. Those who tried that were suffocated, where they lay snuffed out, something we had absolutely no understanding of. We had no form protection from it. All we could really do was wet out handkerchiefs in the muddy water at the bottom of the trench and put it over our mouths, same as you do to stop yourself from inhaling smoke. We were ordered to hold her position at first, but after a few minutes, even the officers and other parts of the trench more badly hit than us started to run from the gas. In the end, we had escaped the trenches and ran back towards the mine and road. There you could see these chaps just laying there, gasping for breath, and they were dying in one of the worst ways imaginable. But worse for us was that we had absolutely no idea how to alleviate their suffering. It was so confusing that one of our sergeants took this big jar of Vaseline and started applying it inside the throats of some of these poor young blokes. It didn't help, of course, but I think the point was to help him feel like he was doing something, anything, to help the poor buggers. And my God, the state of them that were swelling up, swelling and changing colors. They asphyxiated on their own lung fluid, just rows and rows of men, turning purple and blue, before they died. Some others that had only breath and a little were desperately trying to drink muddy water from ditches at the side of the road. That didn't do them any good. It just made them sicker. Our eyes were streaming with tears, burning like the devil. But luckily for me, I could still see. There was nothing we could do for those that were blinded, but they needed some kind of comfort. Something to at least give them an idea that their wounds couldn't be treated. All we had were rows of bandages from our first aid kit, which we carried in the corner of our tunic. So we unrolled the bandages and wrapped them around the heads of those that were blinded, before we marched back towards a plan for treatment. I was put at the head of the column of 10 or 12 blind men, each with a hand on their shoulder of the man in front. Or you could see around you was columns of blind men being led back from the front lines. It was truly haunting. But perhaps the most haunting part was that on our way back, we marched near the riverbank. It was there that I saw hundreds of bodies floating in the water. Men had gone down into the river, trying to drink the water to soothe the burning in their throats. Then they died in the water because of the bloating effect of the gas. They just floated up to the surface and started floating downstream. It was a river of bodies, and it's an image I don't think I'll ever forget as long as I live. I have to go roll call soon to see just how many are left, but I don't think there are many at all. God help those of us that are well enough to carry on the fight, because I know we'll have to face this news and terrible threat again, and soon. That's all there is in that particular section of his diary regarding the Battle of the Pura. But I sat there and read it in one more sitting, totally engrossed. I had no idea I had a family member that had been involved in something so utterly terrifying, something that I think would have driven me mad if I had been forced to witness it. Reading that diary was more terrifying than any Stephen King novel I've read, because I know it was real. I know the river bodies was actually a real thing, and not drawn from the imagination of some dumb writer. After that, I couldn't stop reading about World War I, knowing my great-great-grandfather was a part of it. A lot of it is pure horror, but nothing disturbed me as much as reading about the first gas attack. I'm sure you all agree. Being subjected to that sort of new and terrifying technology would have truly been hell on earth.